Once upon a time, in a small village surrounded by tall trees and singing birds, there lived a beautiful girl named Ataku. Her beauty was like the morning sun, bright and warm. Her skin shone like polished ebony, and her smile was so sweet that it made everyone who saw her happy. People said she was the most beautiful girl in the whole village, and maybe even in all the lands beyond the river. Ataku lived with her parents, Papa Kim and Mama Yugo. They were farmers who worked very hard, but their farm was small, and they didn't have much money. Every day, they prayed to the gods to bless their family with riches. One day, something happened that changed Atika's life forever. It was market day, and the village square was crowded. Traders from faraway lands came with colorful clothes, shiny beads, and sweet-smelling spices. But what caught everyone's attention that day was a man named Obiarika. He was not like other men. Obiarika was old. His hair was white like cotton, and his face was wrinkled like a dry leaf. He was short and had a big belly that shook when he walked. His teeth were yellow, and his voice sounded like a frog's croak. People whispered that he was the ugliest man in the village. But Obiarika was also the richest. He owned the biggest farmlands, many goats and cows, and he always carried a big bag of gold coins. Women who saw him always laughed behind his back, and young girls ran away when he tried to talk to them. That day in the market, Obiarika saw Ataku for the first time. His small, round eyes widened, and his heart started beating fast. He wanted her to be his wife. Without wasting time, Obiarika walked straight to Atika's parents. He did not care about the crowd staring at him. Papa Kim, Mama Yugo, he said in his croaky voice, I want to marry your daughter, Atik. Mama Yugo gasped. Papa Kim scratched his head and said, But she is still young. Obiarika smiled, showing his yellow teeth. I will give you 20 bags of gold, he said, dropping his heavy bag on the ground. The sound of the coins clinking made Mama Yugo's eyes shine. 20 bags of gold. It was more money than they could ever dream of. When Ataku came back from the market and heard what her parents had done, she cried, Mama, Papa, please don't make me marry that man, she begged. He is old and ugly. I don't love him. But her parents had already made up their minds. Ataku, we are poor, Mama Yugo said. Obiarika's gold will help us. Think of your little brothers and sisters. They need food and clothes. Papa Kim added, the gods have answered our prayers. You must marry him. Ataku cried all night, but her parents wouldn't listen. The wedding was set for the next full moon. A week before the wedding, Ataku decided to run away. Late at night, when everyone was asleep, she tied her clothes in a small bag and crept out of the house. She ran and ran until she reached the forest. The forest was dark and quiet, but Ataku was not afraid. She sat under a big tree and began to cry again. Oh, great gods, she whispered, help me. I don't want to marry that man. Suddenly, she heard a voice. Why are you crying, my child? Ataku looked up and saw an old woman standing before her. The woman's back was bent, and her hair was as white as Obiarika's, but her eyes were kind. She held a long staff in one hand. Who are you? Ataku asked, wiping her tears. I am Neoma, the keeper of the forest, the old woman said. Tell me your troubles. Ataku told her everything. The old woman listened quietly, then nodded. Go back home, she said. Marry the man. Do not be afraid, for things are not always as they seem. Ataku wanted to ask more questions, but before she could speak, the old woman disappeared into the night. The day of the wedding arrived, and the whole village gathered to watch. Ataku wore a beautiful dress made of colorful beads and shining cloth, but her face was sad. Obiarika, on the other hand, looked very happy. He laughed loudly and showed off his gold. When the ceremony was over, Obiarika took Ataku to his house. It was the biggest house in the village, with many rooms and servants, but Ataku felt like a bird trapped in a cage. One day, while Obiarika was away, Ataku decided to explore the house. She went from room to room, looking at all the riches he owned. Then she came to a door that was locked. Why is this door locked? She asked one of the servants. The servant shook her head. No one is allowed to enter that room, she said. Master Obiarika keeps it locked all the time. Ataku's curiosity grew. What was behind the door? Why was it locked? She decided she would find out. The next time Obiarika went to the market, Ataku searched the house for the key. She finally found it hidden in a drawer. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the door. Inside, the room was dark and cold. There was a strange smell, like something old and rotten. Ataku lit a lamp and looked around. What she saw made her gasp. Inside the locked room, Ataku saw strange and terrifying things. In the corner of the room stood a wooden table covered with old, dusty cloth. On the table were small clay pots, feathers, and animal bones. Hanging from the ceiling were charms made of dried leaves and sticks tied together with red string. On the floor was a large, round calabash filled with something thick and dark, like blood. The smell made her stomach turn. Atika's hands shook as she stepped further into the room. On the wall, she saw paintings of strange symbols, and in the center was a large mirror covered with cobwebs. She moved closer to the mirror and wiped the glass with her hand. As soon as she did, the room grew colder, and she heard a low whisper behind her. "Why are you here?" the whisper said. Atika spun around, but no one was there. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she told herself to be brave. She looked back at the mirror. This time, instead of her own reflection, she saw something else, a figure, dressed in black, with glowing red eyes. The figure raised a hand and pointed at her. "Leave this place now," it said in a voice that sounded like many people speaking at once. Atika screamed, dropped the lamp, and ran out of the room. She locked the door behind her and hid in her room, her body trembling. When Obiarika returned that evening, he noticed that Ataku looked pale and frightened. "What is wrong, my wife?" he asked, his voice unusually gentle. Ataku hesitated, then said, "Why is that room locked? What are you hiding in there?" Obiarika's smile disappeared. His face darkened, and for the first time, Ataku saw a different side of him. "You went into the room, didn't you?" he said, his voice low and cold. Atika stepped back, fear rising in her chest. I didn't mean to." Obiarika sighed and sat down. "You should not have gone there," he said. "But now that you have, I must tell you the truth." Atika's heart raced as she sat down, waiting for him to speak. "I am not an ordinary man," Obiarika began. "Many years ago, I was cursed by a powerful witch. She turned me into what I am now, ugly and old, because I refused to marry her daughter. The only way to break the curse is to marry a woman who will love me despite my appearance." Atika's mouth dropped open. "A curse?" she whispered. "Yes," Obiarika said. "And that room you entered contains the tools I have used to try and break the curse. But nothing has worked so far. That is why I sought you, Ataku. Your beauty and purity might be the key to freeing me." Ataku felt a mix of anger and sadness. "So you married me to break your curse? You don't love me?" Obiarika looked into her eyes. "At first, it was about the curse. But now, I do love you. You are kind and strong, and I want to make you happy." Atika didn't know what to say. She stood up and walked out of the room, her mind filled with questions. Could she ever love a man like Obiarika? Could she forgive him for marrying her under false pretenses? And what if the curse could never be broken? That night, Ataku dreamed of the old woman in the forest. In her dream, the woman said, "Do not judge too quickly, my child. Sometimes the ugliest shell hides the most beautiful pearl. Look deeper, and you will find the truth." Ataku woke up with tears in her eyes. She decided she would stay and try to understand Obiarika's story. But deep in her heart, she felt that this was only the beginning of a much bigger mystery. The days that followed were strange for Ataku. She tried to act normal, but her mind was full of questions about Obiarika and the curse. She avoided the locked room and spent most of her time outside, walking through the fields or sitting by the river. One evening, Obiarika called her to the dining room. The table was filled with all kinds of food: roasted yam, spicy soup, and fresh palm wine. "Come, my wife," he said with a warm smile. "Let us eat together." Atika hesitated but sat down. As they ate, Obiarika began to tell her more about himself. "Before the curse, I was a handsome and respected man," he said. "I had many friends and a bright future. But the witch who cursed me was angry because I refused to marry her daughter. She wanted to punish me for rejecting her family. Ataku listened closely. Why didn't you marry her daughter? She asked. Obiarika sighed. Her daughter was cruel and selfish. She wanted me for my wealth, not because she loved me. I could not live with someone like that. Attica thought about his words. She realized that, despite his appearance, Obiarika seemed kind and thoughtful. But there was still a part of her that felt uneasy. That night, Attica couldn't sleep. She kept hearing the old woman's voice in her dream, saying, "Look deeper, and you will find the truth." She decided she needed answers, not just from Obiarika, but from the gods themselves. The next morning, Attica went to the village shrine. The priestess, a tall woman with eyes that seemed to see everything, greeted her. "What brings you here, child?" Attica knelt before her. "Great priestess, I need your guidance. My husband says he is cursed, but I feel there is more to the story. Please, ask the gods to show me the truth." The priestess nodded and led Attica to the altar. She lit a fire and threw special herbs into the flames. As the smoke rose, she began to chant. The air grew heavy, and Attica felt a strange energy around her. After a long silence, the priestess spoke. "The gods have revealed something important," she said. "Your husband speaks the truth, but there is a hidden danger. Someone close to him does not want the curse to be broken. You must be careful, my child. Trust no one." Attica's heart sank. Who could the priestess be talking about? Was it one of Obiarika's servants? Or was it someone else in the village? As Attica walked back home, she felt a chill in the air. She decided she would keep her eyes open and her heart strong. Whatever the danger was, she knew she had to be ready for it. That evening, as she sat by the fire, one of the servants approached her. "Madam," the servant whispered, "I must speak with you. There is something you need to know." Attica's heart raced. "What is it?" she asked. The servant looked around nervously. "I have seen strange things in this house," she said. "Master Obiarika is not the only one hiding secrets. There is someone else. Someone who does not want you here." Attica leaned forward. "Who? Tell me." The servant hesitated, then whispered, "The head maid. She is not who she seems to be. Be careful, madam. She watches everything you do." Attica's mind spun with questions. Why would the head maid want her gone? Was she connected to the curse? Attica decided she would watch the maid closely. Late that night, as the house grew quiet, Attica heard footsteps outside her room. She peeked through the crack in the door and saw the head maid walking toward the locked room. The maid held something in her hand, a small, glowing object. Attica's heart pounded as she watched the maid unlock the door and slip inside. Quietly, Attica followed her. She pressed her ear against the door and heard the maid speaking in a low voice. "You will not win," the maid said. "The curse must remain forever." Attica's blood ran cold. She realized the maid was working against Obiarika. But why? What did the maid stand to gain from keeping the curse alive? Attica knew she needed to act fast. She had to uncover the maid's secrets and find a way to protect herself and Obiarika. The old woman's words echoed in her mind. "Look deeper, and you will find the truth." Attica stayed frozen by the door, her mind racing. The maid's words were clear. She was determined to keep Obiarika cursed. But why? What was her connection to the curse? Attica decided she had to be brave. She couldn't let the maid discover her, so she tiptoed back to her room, her heart pounding with fear and determination. The next morning, Attica acted as if nothing had happened. She went about her day quietly, but her eyes were sharper than ever. She watched the maid closely. The maid, a tall woman named Yoloma, was calm and polite, but Attica noticed something strange. Yoloma always avoided looking her in the eye. Later that evening, when Obiarika was out visiting his farmlands, Attica decided to search Yoloma's quarters. She waited until the house was quiet, then slipped into the maid's small room. It was simple, with a wooden bed and a single chest of drawers, but Attica's instincts told her there was more to it. She carefully opened the drawers and found nothing unusual, just clothes and a few trinkets. Then, under the bed, she found a small wooden box. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were items that made her gasp. There was a small clay doll that looked like Obiarika, with a needle stuck in its heart. There was also a piece of red cloth tied in knots and a black stone covered in strange symbols. Finally, there was a folded piece of paper with a name written on it. Obiurika. Attica's blood ran cold. These were tools of dark magic. Yoloma wasn't just keeping the curse alive. She was actively working to harm Obiurika. But why? Before Attiku could think further, she heard footsteps approaching. Panicking, she quickly put the box back under the bed and hid behind the door. The door creaked open, and Yoloma stepped inside. She stopped, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "Who's there?" Yoloma said, her voice low and threatening. Attiku held her breath, praying Yoloma wouldn't find her. After a few moments, Yoloma sighed and muttered to herself, "I must be imagining things." She lit a small lamp and sat on her bed, her back to Attiku. Attiku used the chance to slip out of the room as quietly as she could. She ran back to her room, her heart pounding. She couldn't keep this to herself anymore. She had to tell Obiurika. The next morning, when Obiurika returned, Attiku pulled him aside. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. Obiurika frowned. "What is it, Attiku?" She told him everything, about the locked room, about Yoloma sneaking inside, and about the strange items she found in the box. Obiurika's face darkened as he listened. "Yoloma has been with me for many years," he said. "I trusted her. If what you're saying is true, then she has betrayed me in the worst way. We must act quickly," Attiku said. "The priestess warned me that someone close to you was working against you. Now I know it's her." Obiurika nodded. "We will go to the priestess together. She will know what to do." That evening, under the cover of darkness, Attiku and Obiurika made their way to the village shrine. The priestess was waiting for them, as if she already knew they were coming. "You have discovered the truth," she said, her voice echoing in the quiet night. "Yoloma is the daughter of the witch who cursed you. She has been sent to ensure the curse is never broken." Obiurika's eyes widened in shock. The witch's daughter? But why? Why would she do this? The priestess placed her hands on Obiurika's shoulders. "Because her mother's power depends on your suffering. If the curse is broken, the witch will lose her strength, and Yoloma will lose her purpose. You must confront her, but be careful. She is dangerous." Attika's heart sank. How could they confront someone as cunning and cruel as Yoloma? But she knew they had no choice. The priestess handed Obiurika a small vial filled with a glowing liquid. "This is a potion of truth," she said. "When the time is right, use it to force her to confess. The gods will guide you." As Attiku and Obiurika walked back home, the air felt heavy with tension. They knew the final confrontation with Yoloma was near. Attiku held Obiurika's hand tightly and whispered, "We will face this together." But deep inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was greater than they realized, and that the curse was only the beginning of a much darker story. The night after their visit to the priestess, the tension in the household grew unbearable. Attiku and Obiurika decided to keep their plans secret until the right moment. Attiku remained calm and observant, while Obiurika acted as if nothing was wrong. But they both knew the confrontation with Yoloma was inevitable. 2 nights later, Obiurika hosted a feast for the village elders. Yoloma was busy with preparations, her face calm and expressionless. But Attiku noticed how her eyes darted around, as if she were watching everyone carefully. It was the perfect chance to act. After the feast, Obiurika called Yoloma to his private chambers. Attiku hid behind a curtain, clutching the vial of truth potion the priestess had given them. Yoloma entered the room, her expression sharp and calculating. "Master, you called for me?" she said, her voice smooth and polite. Obiurika nodded, his face stern. "Yes, Yoloma. I wanted to speak with you about something important." Attiku stepped out from behind the curtain, and Yoloma's eyes widened in surprise. "What is she doing here?" Yoloma asked, her tone growing tense. Attiku held up the vial. "We know your secret, Yoloma. You've been working against Obiurika all this time. You're the reason his curse still binds him." Yoloma's face darkened. For a moment, she seemed startled, but she quickly composed herself. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice cold. Obiurika stepped closer. "Enough lies, Yoloma. You've served me for years. But all this time, you've been my enemy. The gods have revealed the truth." Euloma's lips curled into a mocking smile. "And what will you do about it? You're nothing but a cursed man, clinging to hope that will never come." Ataku took a step forward. "We'll see about that," she said. Before Euloma could react, Ataku uncorked the vial and flung the glowing liquid toward her. The potion landed on Euloma's skin and began to glow brightly. She screamed, clutching her arms as the light spread across her body. "What have you done to me?" Euloma shrieked. "The gods demand the truth," Obiarika said, his voice firm. "You can no longer hide." Euloma's body stiffened, and her eyes turned glassy. Her voice became low and robotic, as if she were being controlled. "I am Euloma, daughter of Ezenwanyi, the witch who cursed you. My mother sent me here to ensure the curse would never be broken. I have worked in secret, using charms and spells to keep you bound. If the curse is lifted, my mother will lose her power, and so will I." Attica's heart raced. The truth was even worse than she had imagined. Obiarika's fists clenched. "Why would your mother do this to me? Why punish me for something so small?" Euloma's voice remained monotone. "Because you humiliated her. She is a witch who thrives on power and fear. Your rejection made her weak, and she vowed to destroy you for it." The glowing light began to fade, and Euloma collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Ataku and Obiarika stared at her, unsure of what to do next. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the room, and the lamps flickered. A deep, menacing voice echoed around them. "You dare to challenge me?" Ataku felt a chill run down her spine. It was Ezenwanyi, the witch herself. The air grew thick, and a dark figure began to form in the corner of the room. Ezenwanyi's presence was overwhelming. Her eyes glowed red, and her voice was filled with rage. "You think you can break my curse?" she hissed. Obiarika stepped forward, his voice steady. "Your reign of terror ends tonight, Ezenwanyi. The gods are with us." Ezenwanyi laughed, a cold, cruel sound that sent shivers through Ataku. "The gods cannot protect you from me," she said. "I will destroy you and anyone who stands in my way." Ataku gripped Obiarika's arm. "We must stand strong," she whispered. "The priestess said the gods would guide us." Ezenwanyi raised her hand, and the room filled with swirling shadows. Ataku and Obiarika braced themselves, knowing they were about to face a battle that would determine their fates and the fate of the curse. The room was plunged into chaos as Ezenwanyi's shadows swirled violently around Ataku and Obiarika. The air grew colder, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the chamber. The flames in the lamps flickered, casting eerie patterns on the walls. Attica's heart raced, but she held her ground, determined not to show fear. Ezenwanyi stepped forward, her towering form casting a dark, imposing shadow over them. Her eyes burned like coals as she pointed at Obiarika. "You dared to defy me, and now you will pay the price," she snarled. Obiarika clenched his fists. "Your curse has caused enough suffering. It ends tonight." Ataku glanced at the small calabash in her hand, a gift from the priestess that she had hidden in her wrapper. The priestess had told her it contained a powerful counterspell, but it could only be used at the right moment. She whispered to Obiarika, "Hold her attention. I'll do what needs to be done." Obiarika nodded, stepping forward to confront Ezenwanyi. "You curse others because of your own bitterness," he said. "But you will never break my spirit." Ezenwanyi laughed cruelly. "You think your spirit can save you? I will crush it, just as I have crushed so many others." As she spoke, Ataku edged toward the altar where Ezenwanyi's dark magic radiated. The shadows clawed at her, but she gripped the calabash tightly, her resolve unshaken. She whispered a prayer to the gods, asking for their guidance and protection. Ezenwanyi noticed her movement and turned sharply. "And you, foolish girl," she hissed. "You think you can save him? You are nothing but a pawn in my game." Attica froze, but only for a moment. She took a deep breath and shouted, "I am no pawn. I am the one who will end your reign." With that, she hurled the calabash at the altar. It shattered, releasing a brilliant light that filled the room. Ezenwanyi screamed, covering her face as the light burned through the darkness. The The shadows dissolved, and the oppressive air lifted. Obiarika grabbed Ataku's hand, pulling her away from the altar as Ezenwanyi writhed in pain. "What have you done?" Ezenwanyi roared, her voice shaking the walls. "The gods have spoken," Attika shouted. "Your power is broken." Ezenwanyi's form began to waver, her once mighty presence growing weaker. She turned to Yoloma, who was still lying on the floor, her face pale with fear. "Daughter, help me," Ezenwanyi cried. But Yoloma only shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You used me, mother," she said weakly. "You never cared about me, only your power." Ezenwanyi let out one final, enraged scream before her form exploded into a burst of black smoke. The room fell silent, the air now clear and calm. Ataku and Obiarika stood together, their hands still clasped. The curse was lifted. Ataku could feel it in the air, in the newfound warmth that filled the room. Obiarika's appearance began to change before her eyes. His hunched back straightened, his wrinkled face smoothed, and his youthful vigor returned. Attika gasped, "Obiarika, you're free." Obiarika touched his face, astonished. "The curse is gone," he whispered. He turned to Ataku, his eyes full of gratitude. "You saved me. I owe you everything." But before they could celebrate, Yoloma spoke weakly. "I am sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I did terrible things under my mother's control. I never wanted this." Ataku looked at her, conflicted. "You must answer for what you've done," she said. "But perhaps there is a chance for redemption." Obiarika nodded. "The gods will decide your fate. But for now, you must leave this house." Yoloma nodded, tears streaming down her face. She stood and walked out, her head bowed in shame. As dawn broke, Ataku and Obiarika stepped outside to see the sun rising over the village. The light felt warmer, brighter than ever before. Obiarika turned to Ataku and said, "You were my salvation, Ataku. You taught me the true meaning of love and courage." Ataku smiled, her heart full of hope, but deep inside, she wondered if Ezenwanyi's darkness was truly gone, or if it was only the beginning of a greater challenge they would face together. Life in Obiarika's household returned to normal in the days following Ezenwanyi's defeat.